Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 531, and our guest, Nick, is one of you guys. He's a listener of the show, and he told me about a caribou hunt that he was going on in Alaska this fall. That's not just why I wanted to talk with Nick, though. The more I got to hear more of his story, I realized he had a cool background in the sense that he is newer to hunting, but he also has extensive experience in the outdoors. As a guide for some climbing and other adventures, I was curious to hear how his previous experience in the outdoors would combine with his take on hunting. And so Nick has gotten to do some hunting so far, but hasn't yet killed a big game animal. Hopefully in this upcoming caribou hunt, he will do that for the first time. But he also has some other unique perspectives, including recently going to an elk hunting bootcamp or class of sorts. So we talk about a lot of things. We talk about his past experience, his perspectives as a new hunter, his upcoming caribou hunt, his recent elk hunting bootcamp, how he sees the outdoors differently now that he is a hunter, and a whole lot more. So even if you're not going to Alaska or are not hunting caribou, there's still a lot that you can take away from this episode. And I'm excited to do a follow-up with Nick after his hunt and hear how it all went for him. As always, guys, if you are enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you could leave a rating or review in your podcast app. Many of you guys are listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and in both places, you can leave that rating or review, and it does help us tremendously. So maybe if you haven't done that yet, but you've been enjoying the show, hit pause and go do that right now. Also, another thing that could help is just share the show with a friend. If there's someone out there, maybe a buddy of yours that you think would enjoy it, just tell them about it, send it their way. And as always, a reminder, there are so many episodes in the back catalog, 10 years now of this point of episodes, and you can find all of them by going to exomountaingear.com/podcast. There you can browse by category or search by keywords and more. Finally, before we get into this conversation with Nick, if you have anything for us, let us know. Send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com and ask us a question for a Monday Minute, or share a question for a topic we could discuss or a guest we could have on a future episode that you guys think would be interesting. Right now, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation with Nick. Well, Nick, I'm excited to chat with you today. It was fun to get your email and read a bit of kind of like your background and then this trip that you're going on and how you're getting into hunting and all that good stuff. You mentioned you ran across, I guess, the Experience Project films on YouTube, and it coincided with you doing a caribou hunt. So we'll talk a bit about that. But any other kind of like background context, just to like let listeners a little bit know of who you are, where you're coming from?
I guess my outdoor experience after college, I got involved in the climbing program at the University of Utah. And for about 5 years, I helped run that program. And we also, partner and I, started a company that we were teaching climbing and then also teaching wilderness first aid and wilderness first responder courses. And in doing that, I had the opportunity to run the U program. And so it was a lot of what I would describe as front country guiding, to where we weren't actually in the backcountry. But then also we got hooked up with some guides and outfitters in Kenya. And we had the opportunity to take several trips to Kenya and teach wilderness first aid, wilderness first responder, and then like technical rescue and mountain skills courses. And so that's kind of what spurred my love of the backcountry. And I had the opportunity to go to some other international destinations doing that. And it was awesome. For somebody in their late 20s, it was a really fantastic experience. It turns out we were much better at teaching courses than we were at running a business. And so the entire time that I did that, I was also attending bar full time to make a living. By the time I was in my 30s, like early 30s, it just was unsustainable. And so for the last 10 years, I haven't been working in the outdoor industry. Um, but I met a lot of really cool people doing that and stayed friends with some of them. And about 10 years ago, one of my good buddies got into hunting pretty hard. And he was also a very accomplished climbing guide and alpinist. And he was able to make the transition into hunting what seemed from the outside like very seamlessly. And then about 5 years ago, I was working for him. He has it's called Aspect Adventure, but an outfitting business where he takes groups out and takes them climbing and hiking and does some outdoor skills. And I was a couple times a year in the spring and the fall working for him as well in a position I describe as like camp mom. And so I would help set up and take down, and then during the courses, I wasn't doing the guiding, but I was taking care of camp, and so I was doing the cooking. I was in charge of creature comforts, basically. If they needed anything, if they were cold, if they were having trouble with their gear, if had dietary limitations, like I was the guy to go to. And so I did get to continue in the outdoors doing that. And yeah, I think it was about 5 years ago. My buddy put a compound bow in my hand for the first time. And the first time it was pretty funny. I couldn't draw it back. I just didn't, I was probably strong enough, but didn't have the muscle memory of how to actually draw a bow.
Hmm.
And so it was like pointing arrow to the sky, and then I'd come down on target. Um, but I think it was the third or fourth time firing an arrow, and I was able to hit a Coke can from 20 yards, and that was like ding, light bulb moment. And so I got myself a bow and started shooting pretty regularly, and then I got a couple of long bows and started shooting those. And then I took my bows walking, I guess is how I would describe it, because
Bow
I
hiking.
bow hiking. Yeah, I was not anywhere competent enough to actually make a stock or put a legitimate play on elk, but I did get to tag along with my buddy Jason several times, and then several times I went out by myself just hiking with the bow. The only thing I ever shot was a grouse, but that was pretty cool. And then life happened, and I didn't really get too into. I didn't dive any deeper into hunting. Um, but then back in January of this year, just kind of out of the blue, Jason hit me up, and he had talked about doing an Alaska caribou hunt, and it's kind of several years ago. Just kind of like, yeah, would you be interested in that? I'm like, yeah, I'm not really a hunter, but for sure. And then you didn't hear anything else about it, didn't make plans. But then in January of this year, he hit me up out of the blue and was like, "Hey, we had this trip planned. One of our buddies who was going to go has to drop out, has a family commitments. You want to go?" And I was like, immediately, it's you don't pass up that opportunity. It's for sure, definitely. Let me know what I need to do, who I need to pay a deposit to. And then it was like, well, I guess I better learn to hunt. And so from there, I was doing just working out in the mornings, and so I started watching hunting videos when I would be working out in the mornings, and I just go to YouTube and type in Alaska caribou hunt, and I'm pretty sure I don't know if I remember if it was the very first video that I watched, but it was one of the very first videos that I came across was your experience project caribou hunt. And immediately I was just like blown away. I was, yes, this is exactly what I want to be doing. Just with the level of the physicality of it, with I'm a type 2 kind of guy. So just what it actually takes, seeing you guys, what it took to harvest those animals and pack them all over, get them down to the river. And then the pack rafting aspect of it. I've done a bit of whitewater. I've been on pack rafts. And so it was just that was full value adventure that I was seeing. And I realized pretty quickly that's not what we're doing. But still just seeing you guys do that, it just really, really lit a fire under me. And then I watched the rest of the Experience Project videos, and and then I think that's when I reached out to you the first time, and it was just like, wow, I watched you guys do this. I'm going on a hunt. It's very different from what you guys did, but thanks for the content. That was awesome. And yeah, and then we have exchanged some emails back and forth, and that's kind of where we got to this point.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm excited to chat with you. I always love, um, I mean, new hunters in general. I always enjoy those conversations and like getting their perspective and knowing what the questions are. But it's really special to me when someone like you, where it's like you have extensive outdoor experience. There's plenty of things. Um, that could be outdoor related that you would know way more than me. Like I can learn from you, whether it's climbing, like first aid, there's all kinds of stuff. So I just think it's really cool when someone's not just new to hunting or new to backpacking or new to kind of any adventure in the outdoors, but it's like, hey, you have all this outdoor knowledge, experience, expertise, adventure, but just not this hunting piece, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, it'd be fun. So I'm excited not only to chat like today before the hunt, but then chat after the hunt and after this trip happens and all that and the takeaways from it. So it's gonna be cool. How many guys are going on this caribou hunt?
So it's three of us.
Okay.
So it's myself, my buddy Jason, who is a great friend and kind of older brother mentor figure, and then one of his buddies from Virginia, a guy named James, who's got a lot of experience hunting in that country, and then has been out west to hunt a few times. For all three of us, it'll be our first trip hunting to Alaska.
Nice. So you said all, up until this point, like your experience hunting has been with the bow, or do you plan on not only taking a bow within Alaska, but are you kind of like bow or nothing for this trip, or is there gonna be a rifle along that you're happy to shoot a caribou with a rifle if you need to?
No, I'm definitely shooting a rifle.
Okay.
I realized pretty quickly hunting is hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy, and despite having plenty of backcountry experience, and I can certainly move in the mountains, it's not easy. And so I'm definitely not a bow hunter or nothing.
Yeah.
I would love to learn to be competent hunting with a bow. But at this point, I realize my limitations, and I'm happy to get it done with a rifle.
Obviously caribou in Alaska, you could be up there pretty early into August, all the way through the rest of the month into September. What's the rough time that you guys are going?
Yeah, so the trip is August 22nd to September 6th, and we are actually scheduled to be in the field August 26th to September 4th. And so
Okay.
we're looking at kind of later season. We're going to the Northern Brooks unit, and so we're looking at later season for that unit.
A little bit less bugs, hopefully a little bit more mobile caribou, maybe some migration moving through. Yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. Less bugs, but also the potential for more weather is
Yeah.
what I've kind of got in mind.
With all your climbing experience and these other trips that you've done, how much of that had, I know you said some of it was front country, especially with the students, but as you've gotten into the back country, like what's kind of the longest that you've been remote or in the back country or have backpacked or like been self-supported and, kind of detached?
Um, I think probably the longest self-supported is not much more than a week, maybe about a week. I did have the opportunity one trip to Kenya to guide a film crew that was filming up on Mount Kenya. And so I think the longest, I was up and down the mountain several times with people. I think the longest I stayed in base camp on the mountain was 11 or 12 days. But that's not a self-supported thing. That was a huge operation. It was a film production. And so we had a team of 100 porters,
Dang.
huge safari tents. So it was a little bit different. That wasn't just three dudes getting dropped off in the backcountry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was an incredible experience, but different, very different from going out backpacking for that amount of time.
Yeah. My first trip to Alaska was Drop Camp Caribou, and that feeling when you make this, I mean, pretty long flight out, you realize how remote you're going, and then you get dropped off, and then when that plane leaves, and you're like, that's my only lifeline back to anything.
Hmm.
It's a pretty wild and cool feeling when you realize you're just truly out there on your own, obviously with a couple buddies in your case, but like just the three of us and this little pile of gear that we have for the next, week or more. It's
Hmm.
wild.
Yeah, I've been imagining that moment, and so I'm really looking forward to. And we'll see. It could be the full spectrum of emotions and reactions. I don't at all want to say like I know we're gonna crush, but I have been thinking about that moment as the plane takes off. Just that we are out there. This will definitely be the farthest out there that I've ever been. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that moment.
Yeah. Well, other than just continuing to talk about this trip, which we'll get into, I want to like rewind back to just that transition for you with a little bit of hunting experience that you got. I mean, even though you're like you said, you're mostly bow hiking and you didn't kill a big game animal, what have you, you're still going through so much, learning so much just in the activity of hunting, of trying to hunt, of trying to locate animals. You said earlier that what appeared to you, your buddy is Jason, right?
Yeah,
That
yes,
is,
Jason.
he started hunting. You said it kind of seemed like you did it pretty seamlessly. And then you said in your own experience, like hunting's hard. What are some of the, as you got into it, what is not only some of the lessons, but just like, I don't know, some of what surprised you about it? Because you have these ideas of what hunting is like, and then you start hunting, and then you just realize how many facets and things there are to it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, and again, from the outside, it looks seamless, but I think Jason really just put in the time. And I know that he had had some hunting experience back east before, and so he wasn't completely new to it. But I really think he just put in the time, and also his level of competence is just off the charts. But I think it was a time thing. I'm sure he went through a similar learning curve. For me, um, let's see, lessons that I'm having to learn. The biggest one I think is a patience aspect.
Hmm.
When in my previous pursuits, it's like you're just charging to get to the top. And so I have found myself both when I'm out by myself and then when I've been out a few times with people that don't have that much more experience than I do. It's like, hey, do you want to go to the top of that? Yes. And then you get to the top of it and you're like, why did we come up here? Whereas before that was the point was to go to the top of things. I've learned with hunting, there's a fine balance between being mobile and just sitting and staying put. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I have found, or I guess that is where my previous experience is working against me most. And I've thought about what I need to do to overcome that. And I think I'm going to try to hunt whitetail back east sometime this year, where you're literally just sitting and waiting.
Hmm.
Um, it'll be like nails on a chalkboard for me, but I think as far as becoming a better hunter, I think that's probably my biggest weakness at this point. Um, and then also, there's a lot to glassing. Two people, one with experience, one without experience, can sit and glass the same spot, the same country. And there's just, you learn about glassing, how to pick apart terrain, how to recognize animals as opposed to bushes, how to determine what's a bear and what's a burned out stump, those sorts of things
Hmm.
that I assume and I think just come with experience. There are some techniques to it that can be learned, but I think a lot of it is just time behind the glass.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I found out, it's a little bit different. I'm very fortunate in that where I live in northern Utah, I can go on day hunts, and within 20 miles of my house, I can be legitimately hunting, and there are animals. But because we're that close to a population center, there's not as many animals, and they can be pretty skittish. Um, and you're literally hunting the same area where there's recreational trails. My kind of a funny story. My most quote unquote successful day out walking with a bow, I was just out by myself early one morning and going up a hiking trail to get a little bit off the beaten path. And my first encounter was with a mama moose and her calf. And I'm really fortunate. The sun was coming up right as I encountered them, and I was backlit to them. And so she knew I was there, but she couldn't see me. And so I just got down really low, and just crouched in a bush and prayed basically. And she, she just went on her way, but they were, 20 yards, well within bow range. That's the only time I've really been within bow range of a big game animal. And it was just feeling that heartbeat and realizing that you're not the top of the animal chain there. Whether she wants to eat you or not, she will stomp the life out of you.
Hmm.
And so that was really cool. And then I just went about my way, and without any really rhyme or reason, I just looked at a ridge and was like, I'm hiking up that. And so I pop up over this ridge, and I end up running into this young, attractive, solo female bow hunter. And I was kind of just like, what? You exist? Like, what? Where am I?
Yeah.
And yeah, I just, like, I walked right into her. So, hey, how's it going? You seeing anything? Because I don't know what else you ask somebody out in the woods. And she goes, yeah, there's three bulls on that ridge over there. And then it just gets further into the twilight zone. I'm like, what? And sure enough, on an opposite ridge, she's glassing up three bulls that are just hanging out at the top of a ridge. And it was even further into the twilight zone. So you're glassing these bulls, and then you look down the ridge, and there's the hiking trail. And literally, there's two people and a dog hiking on the hiking trail. And you look up the ridge, and there's three bulls hanging out. And this is when I was brand new. It might have been my first day out on my own. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, how does this happen? And so she put a legitimate stock on them. There, she had been watching them for a while, and I just went down the hiking trail just in case. And nothing really became of it, but that was from then on. I was like, hunting is awesome. I need to do this more. But
Yeah.
but that's the kind of thing where I've done most of my days have been in that kind of area where there's a lot of other people, and there's people hunting, and then there's also people recreating. And
Yeah.
so I trying to think. I've been on a couple of trips just as a tag along where we've been a bit further out, but still the hunting pressure is pretty high in the area where we're at.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting. I'm really excited both for Alaska to be a bit further away, and then after Alaska, I've also got some hunts planned where we're going to be able to get a bit further out.
What you mentioned about there's elk here and you're seeing that from a perspective of a hunter, and then not far down the mountain there's a trail and people hiking. The shift that happens when you become the hunter, it's just interesting to me that that changes your entire outdoor experience. It's like even if it wasn't hunting season and you were hiking that trail, you were going to have a different mindset, perspective,
Hmm.
and physically be looking at the experience in the country differently than someone who's hiking the same trail at the same time, but
Hmm.
isn't a hunter. It's just like a total shift in mindset of like I'm even again, even if it's not hunting season, like I'm looking differently. I'm looking for things.
Hmm.
I'm looking at country differently. I'm analyzing things differently. I'm seeing it's like cliche or as weird as it sounds, like I'm seeing more of the world around me.
Mhm.
And in speaking with some people who are uh like very experienced in the outdoors but don't hunt, when they start to realize that, like, hey, I've been in the outdoors a lot, but because I'm not a hunter, I haven't been thinking with hunting and context and wildlife in mind. I realize I've been missing out on more of what's actually there. Like I just haven't seen it because I haven't been thinking about it. And I just find that that is really fascinating.
Absolutely. It was like you're paying attention at a higher level that you didn't quite realize existed before. And for me, it lit another fire in my passion for being in the outdoors and in the backcountry. I had grown a little bit stagnant in my love of it over the last 10 years, and so that was really exciting to have this new awareness, like you said, new level of paying attention to where even when I'm not out hunting, when it's not hunting season, I find myself constantly paying attention to the wind. I hike with my eyes up now rather than before when you're going out to climb something, you're just going out. A lot of times, you're head down, trucking along, not paying nearly as much attention. Or I often find myself now stopping to look at tracks, where it was before you would just march right over that and not pay any attention to it. And so exactly what you described, I've experienced this whole new love and appreciation for the outdoors and for wild places, even just in my own backyard where they're heavily trafficked by people and by recreation and by dogs. It's amazing how much is actually out there that many people who aren't hunters are just completely oblivious to.
I don't know anything about this. You mentioned it briefly in one of your emails, and I know you recently just came out of this experience, but you went to some sort of, I don't even know what to call it. Was it a boot? Did you say a boot camp or an elk hunting camp? What was this thing you just did recently? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so it was called the Elk Hunting Bootcamp, and it was put on by an outfitter out of northern Utah. They're called Process Based Hunter, and the short way I'd describe it was kind of a hunting boot camp, almost like a Boy Scout camp for grown men. And it was awesome. I just went last weekend and I can't say enough good things about it. I had such an awesome experience. I met really cool people participating. The guide staff was awesome. And basically what it was is there was about 40 participants. They had us broken into 5 groups. So there were 5 different modules. 3 of the modules were shooting focused. So there was one that was shooting at a range, and then 2 that were mountain shooting skills. The other 2 modules, one of them was backcountry skills focused. So what do we pack? What are important considerations? Um, and then the fifth one was an elk behavior module. So where are you going to find elk? What strategies do you take when you're looking for elk? What do you do when you find elk? Elk calling, and those sorts of things. And for somebody, I'm trying to think where I was definitely on the newer end. I don't know that I was the very greenest, but I was definitely on the newer end of hunting. But a lot of the participants, I'd say probably 30 out of the 40, were guys from back east who had extensive experience, well, varying levels of experience hunting, mostly whitetail, that were looking to gain Western hunting skills. And it was, like I said, it was awesome. For me, the biggest benefit is that I don't have that much experience with a rifle. I definitely learned to shoot in Boy Scouts 25 years ago, 30 years ago, but I bought a rifle 2 years ago. I've put a couple hundred rounds through it, but I learned more in a weekend with 4 boxes of shells about shooting than I had previously in any of my shooting experience. And so that was awesome. It was both, I feel like I gained skills, but also gained confidence and a good appreciation of limitations of my skill level at this point. So yeah, it was fantastic. I would certainly recommend it to people who are newer to hunting, or if you are an experienced hunter and wanting to get into Western hunting, it was phenomenal.
No, that sounds cool. What, I mean, I feel like you go into things like with an open mind and, you realize where you're coming from in terms of like, I'm newer to this. I just want to learn. Like, I get the sense you're not coming into things with a lot of ego, which is great. Were you, uh, encouraged by, or did you have kind of more of a reality check to kind of scale back your capabilities with a rifle? Because I mean, I feel like I see this with some guys think, oh, anyone can shoot at 800 yards. It's so easy. And then other guys are like, man, when you actually get to shoot in the mountains or from field positions, like I realize I shouldn't be shooting more than, 300 yards.
Hmm.
What, I guess, just coming out of this, being newer to shooting with a rifle, and then it sounds like getting some kind of more real world scenarios and shooting. Like as you go to your caribou hunt, like what are you thinking about in terms of like what's realistic for you?
Yeah, so honestly, I was pretty encouraged by the experience. I was one of the newer shooters, but I was pretty competent relative to the group in shooting. Was by no means the best in the group, or even second or third, but I wasn't noticeably worse than anybody else, and I actually made some shots that surprised me. Um, the the first hunting module, or the first shooting module, I shot really well, and I was like, wow, this is really confidence inspiring. And that was one of the mountain, like the easier, I guess, of the mountain shooting. And then we went to the range, where you're mostly shooting prone or from stable positions. And again, I was like, wow, okay, like I can shoot all right. And then we went up to the harder of the mountain shooting, where you're actually shooting cross canyon and dealing with wind. It was in the afternoon, and it was quite windy. And then that's where you have a slice of the humble pie. Um, from the range, I was hitting. I wasn't often hitting my first shot. We were working in groups of two, where we'd have a shooter and a spotter, and I was often really close. And then I most of the time would hit on a second shot. But we're shooting distances out to, I think the longest shot I hit was 525, and it's on a 10 or 12-inch plate. And so, you do that and you're like, wow, this is great. But then you get out to the actual mountain range, and I was not hitting at those distances. And the wind is a huge factor. And 300 yards was okay, on a 12-inch plate. I'm hitting 300, feeling pretty good about it. But 400, there's a lot of wind. We took some shots on a bigger plate at 600, and I mean, I really scared that plate. It was shaking in its steel, but I didn't hit it,
Yeah.
Um, so it was confidence inspiring, but also well aware of my limitations. Um, as far as, well, I'll definitely do some more shooting this summer. I've got plans to be shooting consistently to try to build skill. But at this point, I feel like really modest in the distances I'm going to be comfortable at in Alaska. There's by no means am I 600 yards, 100% no. 400 yards, like likely not. Um, I don't know exactly what to expect as far as what range we're going to be able to get in to Caribou.
Hmm.
I know that where we're going later in the season, and it's mostly a drop camp tundra hunt. We're not hunting mountain caribou like you did in the experience project. So I really don't know. I know the caribou are going to be on the move, And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking it's going to be watching where they're moving for the first few days that we're out there, and then figuring out where we can get set up to get realistic shots. But in my mind, it's not going to be the type of hunting where you see them and they're just mingling and browsing, and you can sneak up and close a lot of distance. In my mind, they're going to be in migration. So I think that the game plan will be figure out where we can glass and get shots from to animals that are moving, and you catch them to stop for a minute or you whistle to get them to stop. I don't really know, but I know my shooting abilities at this point are modest in the field, especially are modest at best.
Yeah, I mean, all that you said makes a ton of sense and is very, I think, very good just in terms of, I mean, I still do this too of, man, it's still, people want to throw out distances, but it's so conditions based. I mean,
Hmm.
not only wind, but how much time you have, the animal alertness. There's just keeping all of those things in mind and then making a decision based on your previous experience and capabilities for that specific scenario. So yeah, everything you're saying makes a ton of sense in terms of how you're thinking about this. And then in terms of like shot opportunity, I think you're thinking really well about what may be just in terms of, okay, are they moving? What does this look like? It, like, as you said, it's gonna be different than like what you saw in terms of our mountain caribou hunt for the most part. Um, and maybe it's more a situation of figuring out where they're moving, and then a bigger thing that comes into play is trying to get ahead of them or circle around them to cut them off because it is hard if you find yourself chasing caribou that are moving, a lot of times, good luck.
Yeah.
There's times where, they do slow down to feed and you may time that okay. But if they're really moving, really migrating, that obviously can be tough. And then even though it is pretty open country, there are a lot of like little small folds and creases and things like that where you can use terrain, even though it's not big mountain terrain, to close the distance as well. So it's also one of those things that I think sometimes people are like, man, it's so open. I'm gonna have to shoot it 600 yards when it's like, not really. I mean, the caribou are, generally not pressured as much. They're not used to people as much. And then there just is a lot of kind of like micro terrain that you can either use to approach them or, like I said before, like you're basically setting up an ambush where it's like, okay, I think they're going here. Let's get ahead of that. And then we'll wait for kind of them to work their way towards us.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm imagining. I'm imagining being in a position where you've got plenty of time to build a stable rest. You know that your shooting position is not going to be at steep angles like it was in the mountains of Idaho, but then your shot opportunity could come really quickly, and that you have to be ready to take the shot when it's presented, is
Hmm.
kind of what I have in mind.
Yeah. And then one random thing is I'm just thinking about caribou hunting, especially if they're migratory and grouped up pretty good, just to keep in mind is just sometimes the shot opportunity isn't, hey, is the caribou there or is the bull that I want to shoot, broadside or relatively quartering, but it's like what is going on around it and behind it. Because
Hmm.
there's been plenty of situations where it's like, okay, I have a perfect presentation shot opportunity of a bull that I'd love to shoot, but there's a caribou crossing behind it, or it's just kind of hanging out feeding behind it, and just always keeping that stuff in mind when they're
Hmm.
grouped up, because sometimes that's a dynamic that comes into play with like a caribou hunt that you don't typically think about as much on a deer or an elk hunt. It can happen, of course, on those hunts as well, but I would just say it's a lot more common to consider on a caribou hunt like that.
Sure. And what I've seen in this is all based on YouTube. Um, so it's kind of a grain of salt. But what I've seen is that you might have that animal in the crosshairs, but then you have to wait for your buddy who's not, zeroed in on an animal to tell you it's clear. And you
Correct.
might, exactly you said, you think you've got this shot, you do have this shot, but you're focused on what you're seeing and you're not seeing the animals around it, the bigger picture around it. And so then it's wait, wait, wait. Okay, clear, take the shot and
Hmm.
take the shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes into, I mean, we could go into the weeds on this too, but that goes into like some people tend to over zoom on like their scope and get
Hmm.
too focused and lose too much broader perspective.
Yep.
The guys who think like, oh, I just need max magnification because I need to pick the spot and I need to see as much of the target animal as possible. If there's numerous things with that as it increases the appearance of your movement, right? So your sight picture is going to be less steady because you're magnifying it.
Hmm.
But yeah, you lose context of what's going on around the animal, behind the animal, not only for that shot, but then, of course, under recoil, then again, more perceived movement because higher magnification, and then trying to get back on target becomes more difficult. And
Yep.
again, going back to the dynamics of caribou specifically, it's like not getting back on target on an animal because there's maybe only one or two or three, but it's like getting back on target on the animal that I shot at and trying to
Yes.
relocate it among potentially a bunch. And so just in general, use kind of as little magnification as you're comfortable with, to be honest with you, just so you can see what's going on around it for the shot and then also
Hmm.
for post shot.
Yeah, and that was something that I had no experience or thought of until this weekend, actually. And it's one of the things that they went on about in length is using the minimum amount of magnification possible to make a shot. And it was one one of the things is there's a ton of camaraderie at the course, but it was one of the things that the instructor said we could, jokingly, but make fun of somebody if you see them shooting on max magnification, give them a hard time about it. So that was, and all that you said is exactly what they had said, and it makes perfect sense. But to somebody who'd never hunted with a rifle, and I don't have particularly great eyesight. I mean, I'm zooming that thing all the way into the target because I'm thinking this is the best way to shoot. And so that was one of the real good lessons I learned about shooting for hunting this past weekend is that when you're carrying your rifle, you're on its lowest magnification. And, for all those reasons for target acquisition. And then if you once you get in, zoom in a moderate amount, but only the amount that you need to take the shot. And then the only thing that you're using your max magnification for sometimes is spotting, is the way it was described. But for shooting, yeah, I mean, 10, 12 power. I've got a 3 by 18, but that 15 and 18 power, you're not actually taking shots on animals at that. And that's for somebody who is new, it was kind of like, well, but how am I going to shoot at 500 yards if I'm not at 18 power? And then I actually learned really quickly that that's just not the case. That you can competently take longer shots at 10 magnification, at 12 magnification max. And exactly what you said, you could see it in your crosshairs floating more at those higher magnifications, and then also at target reacquisition. It was just a lot easier at 10 power, 12 power than having it zoomed all the way up. So I think that, yeah, it's a great point for newer hunters and newer shooters that you wouldn't think unless it was explained to you and then you're forced to practice that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially with you saying, hey, I'm not shooting it, you know, whether the max ends up being like 4 or 5, 600 yards, like you said, you're not shooting at six. So let's just say that for a rough summary of what you said. I wouldn't see any need to be ever above 10, right? Like
Hmm.
the the scope I hunt with most maxes at 10.
Hmm.
And shooting, big game at extended distances, the few times I've done it, and it's not like my goal, but there's been times where I have done it. Like I think my caribou shot on the experience project, I don't remember, it was somewhere around six, maybe.
Hmm.
That was with the 10x scope, right? So
Hmm.
I can just say from my experience, having shot some animals at six or even beyond with a scope that doesn't go beyond 10, I've never felt like that zoom range has been a handicap.
Hmm.
And the other cool thing, I guess this gets nerdy too, but if you're in a second focal plane scope, so where the reticle's not growing or decreasing with your sight picture, obviously, um, the hash marks, if you have them in your scope, if you're on second focal plane, are only really relevant at the max power. On most
Hmm.
scopes, true though, at that half power, you can use those reference marks. You're just gonna have to double it, right? So if you said,
Hmm.
hey, this hash mark is 1 MOA, but it's a second focal plane scope, well, that's 1 MOA at max power. So say 18 in your case. Double check this with your scope, but what you could potentially do is say, I could hunt with it, or, if I want to make a wind call and not die a wind and kind of use my reticle, well, on half power, so like 9x, what was a 1 MOA hash mark is actually a 2 MOA hash mark.
Hmm.
At least then it becomes some sort of actual reference and standard. Because outside of that, if you're at 7 or 12 or whatever, I mean, you can basically, if it's a second focal plane scope, like ignore those hash marks,
Hmm.
just because they're not really relevant to you at that point.
Yep.
Again, that's a finer detail, and maybe you're just gonna like, yeah, I'm just gonna hold a little bit of wind more by like visual sight picture, and I think I'm gonna get like 6 inches of drift, and here's what I think 6 inches is. So you're not using hash marks, you're doing more of a hold. Um, but that's a nerdy point to look into if you want to look into it.
No, and that's a great point, and it kind of segues into something else that I feel like is important as a new hunter. Um, there's just a lot of gear.
Yeah.
There's a ton of gear, and I found this is another detriment to having a lot of experience in the backcountry before, is that I'm a gearhead, and
Right.
I love gear. I've had lots of nice outdoor gear. Um, and so when I got into hunting, it was like, yeah, my gear is 10 years old. I can replace all this old gear. And I've found myself making purchases that I wouldn't have if I had waited and had more experience. So that the scope is a pretty good example. I bought it, I got a good deal on it. It's a nice, Leupold VX6 scope. It was on sale. This is awesome, right? But exactly what you just said, had I waited and had a little bit more experience, I probably would have bought something a little bit different. And I have found myself with several gear purchases having that same experience where I was just excited. It's amazing, like mind blowing and a rabbit hole how many different types of, you name it, what piece of gear there are.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I would definitely recommend to guys in my similar position is hold off on buying everything until you've had a little bit more experience or a little bit more understanding of what works when and why. Um, and for me, it's been fine. Like I said, I'm a gearhead. I love having gear, but there's definitely some pieces that I would have bought a little bit differently, and I'm sure they'll still work. But that was, I mean, it's just like a fire hose when you start getting into it. Just how many companies there are that make gear and little different nuances and what matters and what doesn't. And so that's been a huge learning curve as well.
Yeah. No, it's overwhelming. Yeah, and like you said, you have an advantage, I think, being, having outdoor experience and all this stuff. Like you probably have a lot of gear and gear knowledge, right? Say on, I don't know, like clothing and layering and knowing how to be comfortable in different
Hmm.
conditions and under different levels of exertion. Like you have a big shortcut in that. But because you are into gear from outdoor experience, then you even gonna get more into like you get more excited about the new stuff, right?
Yeah,
It
exactly.
is part of it. It's one, just getting back to that point of, that's one of the reasons I love new gear as you get into things, because if you can buy, I mean, just to pick on a rifle scope because you said it, but I mean, maybe you buy a used rifle scope, you're already saving some money up front. But then on the other hand, if you decide in 6 months or a year or 2 years, like, oh man, I wish I would have went a different direction, or maybe I want to buy, X instead of Y, you're probably gonna be able to sell that used scope for awfully darn close to what you paid for it, right? Because that
Yep.
depreciation hit's already happened. Like you bought used, you're
Yep.
selling used, you didn't beat it up, it's essentially in the same condition. Like you're probably gonna be pretty close to net zero at that point if you decide you want to
Mhm.
make a change.
Yeah, very true. Yep.
Can't do that with everything, of course, but there's plenty of gear where you can.
Yep. But yeah, it's been fun. It gave me an excuse to replace a lot of gear that's 10 to 15 years old. And yeah, as a gearhead, it's been fun, but then I also got pretty burned out on just spending money and buying gear.
Yeah. With the drop camp hunt, are you guys doing so some of those hunts I know like people will offer like, hey, it's a drop camp and we'll provide a shelter. Some of them even provide food if you want,
Hmm.
versus, hey, we're just transportation. You guys bring all your own. That's up to you. Or
Hmm.
what are you guys doing there?
Yeah, so that was offered by the outfitter. We're just going to handle all of that on our own. So all of the camp gear, all of the food, we're just arranging and handling that on our own.
Yeah, cool. Definitely with that in mind, like have a good stout shelter. Yeah. I mean, winds can
Yep.
be real up there for sure.
Yep.
We learned that on our first drop camp hunt, and that's of all of the gear for that specific hunt. And again, go back to you have no lifeline other than getting flown out of there
Hmm.
if it's even possible, because obviously people can't fly all the time. And if it, even if they could in perfect conditions, it takes a lot of time. Like shelter's critical, of course. And then in those specific conditions in that location, there definitely are demands where, that shelter can get hit pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We are planning on taking it's not hunting, but more mountaineering, base camp style shelter.
Yeah,
So yeah,
perfect.
it's definitely a consideration. And also another consideration is the size of your bomber shelter. Like we might be spending a
Hmm.
day, 2 days, 3 days stuck in a shelter. And then do you want a three-person shelter for three people if you're stuck in it for multiple days?
Yeah.
So those sorts of considerations. And that's where previous experience definitely helps, knowing about gear and honestly a lot of the gear, especially shelters, there's not that much difference between what you would see in climbing, mountaineering, and what you would see in hunting.
Hmm.
Maybe some branding and color, um, but that's something where the previous experience and knowledge definitely helps. And I've seen tents just get shredded, demolished. I've seen big, heavy safari tents just picked up and then slammed into toothpicks in the wind.
Yeah.
And so it's something that, yeah, we definitely are taking into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you not only on the durability and the structural support of the shelter, but like you said, on size and spending time in there. I mean, we on our drop camp caribou hunt had, I think it was 32 or 34 hours, somewhere in that ballpark, if I'm remembering right, where we were,
Hmm.
I mean, aside from stepping outside the shelter to relieve yourself, we were in the shelter straight, period.
Yeah.
And so just having space for that and to not just be cramped, and then yeah, even little stuff like we were playing cribbage and just little stuff to kind of pass the time is very relevant on a trip like that.
Hmm.
I'm so excited for you guys. You guys are gonna have such a good time. I'm excited to hear
Thanks,
how it
man.
goes.
Yeah, I am too. It was from the moment I got that invite, it has just been, I don't think a single day has passed that I haven't thought about it with excitement and just really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah. What other what other questions or like things you have either gone through and thought through or still kind of like thinking through? I mean, obviously this trip's coming up pretty dang quick, but um, yeah, what else has been rumbling around in your brain about it all?
I think another thing that is obviously relevant to hunting, a little bit less so with drop camp, is just the training aspect of it. From the moment that I got that invite, it's been, all right, it's time to train. And in my late 20s and 30s, a lot of stuff I would do just off the couch. I had a pretty good baseline of fitness. I grew up an athlete and active, but I'm 40 now. And I work a physical job that I would call constant moderate exertion. And so I still have a pretty high baseline, but pretty much immediately it was like, all right, it's time to start pack training. And I've been doing that really consistently. I joke like I'm training for a goat hunt, even though I'm going drop camp hunting. Um, but that's one of the things I know you guys touch on a lot in the podcast. And I'm very fortunate that 15 to 20 minutes from my house I can be at a trailhead, and many evenings a week I can go 4 to 6 miles, 1,500 to 2,500 vertical. But that's been something that's been really fun and rewarding, is just like I said, training like I'm going on a goat hunt, because someday I would love to. But that's been a consideration most days. And yeah, I think that's, if you're coming from any place that's not in the mountains, it's really hard to substitute, actually hiking with a heavy pack in the mountains. You can be in really good physical shape, but there's just all the stabilizing muscles and having weight in your hips, and so I feel very fortunate that I've been able to do that. But that's been the other, aside from buying gear and doing research on the actual hunt, that's been a huge consideration for me. That has been most days, I'm thinking about that and doing something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. The where you guys are headed is interesting because even though it's not as much vertical, it's not an easy hunt. Like in terms of covering the miles,
Hmm.
there may be nothing impressive on the specs or on paper to say like, oh, we ended up going 6 miles from camp, or I think I ended up killing my caribou on that drop camp hunt. I think it was about 7 miles, and then packing it out, which is like it was relatively flat. So on one hand, I'm like, yeah, that's not impressive. But the tundra and the ground and the unevenness of it and
Hmm.
the kind of like unexpected when you're walking and you don't know if you're stepping on something firm or if you're gonna drop
Hmm.
16 inches. It's not easy ground to cover, even if it looks like, oh, just big open flat. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, training for it, even though on paper it may not look super demanding, is really smart. And um, making sure, like one thing I would do if I was doing that hunt again, I would do some level of, this may sound weird. I would do some hikes or some level of like step ups and stuff, but with um ankle weights on. Not heavy,
Hmm.
but that forces you to change your gait a little bit, and then it strengthens your hip flexors and things in certain ways that I think translate well to hiking in that kind of like undulated, varied terrain rather than just like hiking the trail or, hiking
Hmm.
up the mountain. I did that. I didn't do that for the drop camp hunt in the tundra. But I did do it some for some of the death hike stuff we've done, in particular with like when we did a snowshoe one, just because I couldn't snowshoe a lot.
Hmm.
And the way that that translated to snowshoeing was helpful. And in thinking about it again, if I was going back into that tundra and all that unexpected undulation, I would do the ankle weights again because I just think it, like going back to what you said about stabilizer muscles and the way it changes your gait, I think it would translate pretty well. So if it were me, I would at least try it, and do that, mix that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. I will probably pick up some ankle weights and try that, because I've heard it described as walking on a sponge with holes
Yeah,
for the tundra. And I have been pack training pretty hard, but that's a really good idea. It's where the weight is. And I can imagine it being spongy, where you're actually having to put more force pulling up out of your step
exactly.
than you would on other types of terrain.
Yep.
So that's a good
Yeah.
idea. I think I'll probably pick up a set of ankle weights and wear those as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
would
yeah,
start
seven.
light, like a couple pounds, and again, don't do it exclusively, but like some exposure
Hmm.
to that I think would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And 7 miles away from camp on a drop camp hunt, that you guys were out from camp. That's a long way from everything I've seen and read about caribou hunting in the tundra.
It was unintentional in the sense that it's not what we wanted to do. Like we weren't trying to, but we just didn't time the migration well on that specific hunt.
I see.
And so rather than caribou kind of like moving through or us seeing big numbers, we just didn't. And so we were
Hmm.
we were covering ground just looking for caribou.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and we killed. I mean, we had five. I think we had 5 tags we filled on that trip.
Okay.
Not all of them were that far away from camp, but it basically mine was like I was the last one to fill a tag. It was the end of the hunt. We had covered a lot of ground, and it was like, man, we weren't seeing anything. Like we need to go somewhere and try and find
Hmm.
some caribou, and end up working out. But yeah, it was for a drop camp hunt. It was a long ways.
And for the tundra, that is a long ways. I've seen some people hunting off of the Dalton Highway with rifle where you have to get 5 miles away.
Hmm.
And there I've definitely watched some people really suffer covering that distance, especially with animal on their back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really good idea with the ankle weights. I'm gonna take you up on that for sure.
Another this makes me think of pack out because it wasn't not all 7 miles was tundra. When you can, if there are river channels, creek beds, etc., using
Hmm.
those as travel corridors works out well just because you tend to get a little bit more stable ground.
Hmm.
It's like part of that pack out and part of even getting to where we killed that caribou was using kind of a braided river channel where we could be on more consistent like gravel to cover ground more efficiently versus just being in the tundra. So that just, I mean, that can translate in a bunch of ways. But if you guys are covering ground, a lot of times those are obviously in slight depressions as well. So if you're trying to keep out of sight, they can be helpful.
Hmm.
But just from an efficiency perspective, they can be really helpful as well. And then it also makes me think of, I don't know if you guys are doing anything for um, waders at all, whether those are over boots or hip waders or anything, but I would look at, the country you're headed into and see those could be pretty key, just in terms of crossing streams and whatnot, if it looks like that's gonna be relevant to where you guys are gonna be dropped.
Hmm. And that reminds me, that's another piece of gear that I have no experience or knowledge of, but it's required. So we're being flown in by a float plane, and so we are required to have up to hip waders.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
honestly, I don't know anything about waders. I'm not a fisherman, so that's something I need to sort out in the next 6 weeks or so.
Yeah. I mean, you can go full on like fishing wader, and like everything else in general, the lighter and more packable you want it to be, the more expensive it's going to be, which is frustrating.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's cheap waders that are going to be heavier and bulkier, or just go to more of a hip wader versus a full like chest wader, and you can get some pretty reasonable, both affordable and packable options. Um, Gosh, I'm literally pulling up my Amazon order history to see if I can find, oh yeah, shoot. Back in 2018, it's still there. Thanks, Amazon. I just had some frog togs. They were called the Reina too. I don't even know if they're made anymore, because this was quite a few years ago. But they were a boot foot hip wader, and I just sized them, to be decent, to be easy to get on and off, not over my boot. So that was one downside for the ones I went with. Of if you have frequent crossings, I was having to take my boots on and off. But they were relatively easy to get on and off. They're pretty dang packable. We carried them on some days on the hunt itself, not just for getting in and out of the floatplane, which they were helpful for that. And they were also stupid cheap. So yeah, you can get away with something like that because again, it's not like you're living in them like you would for some hunts.
Sure. So they would be inside the boot. So you take your boot off and cross with Crocs. Is that
So
what you were doing?
these ones have a built-in boot. So
Oh, they do.
it's
Okay.
called a boot foot, which basically means that the wader itself has a boot. So I would take my boots
I see.
off, keep my socks on, keep my pants on, everything else, and just take my boots off, slide this over, and then the wader itself has that boot foot. So you're walking in, just the wader, and then the upper portion is, sized to fit over your pants. And then it was a hip wader, so it just had like a little um, like a buckle with webbing that you would hook to your pants or like your pants belt that would kind of help hold it up.
Okay.
And we use those for getting on and off the plane. And then they were helpful for crossing some streams and rivers that we didn't kind of want to wade across.
Hmm.
And then in the tundra, I mean, we had plenty of. sections that got wet and mucky and you're stepping in water. But between boots and gaiters, that was really manageable enough for the vast majority of the situations. So it was
Hmm.
rare I kind of needed to pull out these hip waders. But I definitely needed them in certain spots for sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for the tip on that. I will look
Yeah.
into them.
Yeah, I can send you. I mean, these are again just an example, but I can send them to you and all that. It looks like, yeah, I mean, it looks like you can still get them uh Amazon, Dick's Sporting Goods, different places for like $50.
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah. Cool, man. Any other questions before we wrap up? Again, this is part one, and we'll hop back on and chat lessons learned and tell stories after the hunt. But anything else for today?
Yeah, not really about the hunt or in terms of the podcast episode. I do, and maybe another time, I would love to pick your guys' brain a little bit about EXO. I've noticed EXO is a little bit different than a lot of the other outdoor companies that I have seen, in several ways. And one, kind of the biggest, is if I'm not mistaken, you only sell your packs directly through the EXO website
Hmm.
or through, I mean, other special promotions, but you're not going to find them in a store.
Hmm.
And so that was unique. The fact that they're made, like actually made in America, I found unique. And then the other thing is the way that you guys do marketing, I found really unique. Like I've never been blown up by a paid advertisement for EXO packs, but your marketing, as far as I can tell, is to produce really quality content and put it out there into the wild, we'll say, and then guys like me just stumble upon it. And
Hmm.
that's exactly what happened is I just stumbled upon the experience project. And of course I had heard of EXO because like a lot of other people, my buddy said they're awesome. Like that's kind of what you hear about their packs or about your packs.
Yeah.
But then as I started to go into it, I realized just that is pretty unique. It's like it's an organic way of marketing that was not pushy in your face paid advertisement. You're not going to get the beginning of a YouTube episode. Here's an advertisement for EXO, but that it also allows you guys to use your marketing budget, we'll call it, on really cool stuff like going hunting for the experience project hunts, or it allows you to produce more podcast episodes without having ads on your podcast.
Hmm.
And so I guess saying that was my experience with EXO, but then I was just kind of curious, like how conscious has that been for you guys from the beginning, or did it just organically evolve into that?
Yeah, it's everything you said is very true, and it's kind of fun when like someone from the outside can say all of that because I mean, it's conversations that Steve and I have and it's decisions that we've made intentionally, but I don't feel that people get pieces of that mainly when we talk about it. But it's interesting to have someone like you voice that just based on observation. Um, and everything you just said um, is interconnected, right? So the fact that we don't sell in stores and the fact that we don't spend money on marketing, traditional marketing or advertising, and the fact that we make our packs in the US, all of that is so interconnected that I don't think people realize it. So like
Hmm.
obviously to sell in a store, in general, like take EXO out of it, like Acme Corporation has a widget and it costs them $10 to make that widget. And then they're going to sell it to a store for, $15 or $20, right? So that the
Hmm.
company's making money. And then the store's going to turn around and then sell that thing for 30 or $40 to the customer so that the store's making money. And at the end of the day, the customer just bought something for $40 that cost $10 to make, right?
Hmm.
Because everybody in between has to make some money. The people making the
Yep.
product, the people who have a store, the people, sometimes there's like sales groups, there's all kinds of stuff, right? And everybody needs a
Distributors.
piece of
Yeah.
the pie. Yeah,
Yep.
distributors, exactly. So everybody needs a piece of the pie. So at the end of the day, if you want to sell something for, you know, for if you set a price point and say I need to sell something for 40 bucks and then here's distribution and here's marketing and here's sales and here's all these things, you begin to realize like, man, if I want to make any money, I got to make this thing for like 8 or 10 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, one, we didn't start with a price point in mind. Like, so we didn't set out and say, hey, we need to make a backpack that's going to retail for $600 or $700. It was legit. How can we make the best product and then use the best materials and build stuff in the US and keep as much cost out of it and increase cost other than just the product itself so that we can sell it for a reasonable cost, right? So if we were to
Mm-hmm.
sell our packs in stores, they'd be a lot more than they are. And if we were to spend a lot on marketing and like do you what you just said, like pay for pre-roll on YouTube videos or pay for TV shows or sponsor so and so or buy ad space on a podcast or I mean there's a million things, right? Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just flat out don't do that stuff, which is honestly just cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so this all sounds like a commercial. You asked is the only reason I'm getting into this.
Oh no, I asked.
Our
I've got an economics degree, which is why like I thought about it a little bit differently. You know, as
yeah.
soon as I was putting the pieces together, I was like, I'm going to ask them how conscious this was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we have several things working in our favor. Part of it is our our goal isn't to be the biggest. And our goal is not to like make the most money or like show the most profit so that we can then like turn around and say, hey, we have this attractive company who wants to buy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're content with going, hey, we want to build the best product we can. And we know that if we build a really good product and then take care of our customers, that it's going to do well to some extent, right? Because people are
Mm-hmm.
genuinely happy with the product. They're genuinely happy with their experience with us as a company. And then they're gonna tell their friends, like, this is a freaking great pack. They seem like good dudes. They took care of me if I had an issue. And I'm gonna tell my friends. And so that's really like how how we've gone from day zero to 10 years in at this point, basically, as a
Mm-hmm.
company. So it is all intentional. Like that was always the case kind of from the beginning. But what I'll say is it becomes more intentional the more we go on because there's
Mm.
so many other opportunities that could change that, right? So a lot of
Sure.
companies start a certain way, they just don't stay that way.
Yeah.
And so they start as like, oh yeah, we were just a couple of, hunting buddies who want to make a great pack or whatever and blah 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 blah. But then they start either chasing other products or they start seeing like, oh, we could really scale this thing or we could maybe
Mm-hmm.
sell this thing. And so I think part of what hasn't changed for us is we haven't changed. Like the core of what we
Mm-hmm.
want to do hasn't changed. And so I would say it started intentional, but it's kind of been more intentional as time went on, just because there's been so many more opportunities to kind of deviate from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Well, and yeah, I'm not trying to fanboy. Just it's an interesting case study, like business case study. And I'd imagine as you got further into it, there's all of these points of validation that the approach is working, and so then you can stay the course.
Yeah, I mean it is validation in the sense that we do use data, so we see it in data, right? Like when if somebody buys something on our website, we just have a really simple where did you hear about us type thing. And people could say, oh, on a podcast or on YouTube or on Rock Slide or whatever. But by far and away, the number one thing is from a friend. So like we
Mm-hmm.
can see that in data and
Yep.
we really like that. And then two, eh, part of the other reason that I didn't touch on earlier of the reason we don't sell in stores and don't want to isn't the economics. It's the customer relationship. It's like at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, I don't want anyone who has a question about our products having to like talk to someone at Sportsman's Warehouse or Shields or whatever. And I'm glad those places exist. I'm not saying anything bad about them. But we also love that we are direct to consumer in the sense that if you ever have a question, you ever have a problem, you ever have any need, like you're working with us directly. And not only do you get that opportunity, but we also have full transparency into when you bought your pack, all, you know what I mean? Like it's a
Hmm.
very direct thing.
Yeah. It's a very
Um,
different customer experience.
yeah, and we
Yeah.
genuinely enjoy that. Like I'm not only for the customers think, like I think it's better for the customer, yes, but we just genuinely like that in terms of it's freaking cool to sell something and not just like sell it and you sold it to someone, you have no idea who bought it, you have no idea what they did with it, but when you circle back and like get these emails and photos and phone calls and 6 months later or 6 years later, someone's like, "Oh, I just got back from so and so and used my pack and whatever." Um, it creates a lot more satisfaction on our end to know that we're not just selling widgets, right? Like we're
Yeah.
selling something we're passionate about, and then we get to
Yeah.
connect with our own customers about it. Um, yeah, so it's I don't know. It's pretty yeah, we feel super fortunate, man. It's cool.
Yeah, it is. It's cool, man. It's unique, especially in the age of like cheap products and cheap consumption. Yeah, it's cool. Cheers to you guys for doing it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, that was unintended, but yeah, fun.
Yeah, no, I was just curious about that. It was something I wanted to ask whether or not that makes the cut in the podcast. Like that's something I was genuinely curious about. And like I
Yeah.
said, just because I've, studied economics and it's a distinctly different feel from other companies that I've bought products from.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Yeah, I appreciate
You,
it.
I didn't even look ahead of time because I don't, for people who may not know, I don't just ask people on our podcast if they are our customers. Do you even have our pack?
I do. Yeah, I
Oh,
bought a
cool.
K4. And again, like I don't want to fanboy. I had a perfectly fine hunting pack from another company and I ended up taking back the extra big bag because I could still it was in the return window. I
Mm.
kept the frame pack, and it's a smaller one, and that's what I'm using to ruck with.
Oh, cool.
Um, but I specifically bought a K4, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to, from a financial standpoint. But I specifically bought it because I had seen your guys' experience project. I've been listening to you on the podcast. I've got friends who run your packs. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna support these dudes because I like what they're doing. And so like, again, I don't want to fanboy, but your marketing plan worked specifically on a dude like me who I actually care where my products are coming from. The fact that I'm in northern Utah, you guys are based in Idaho, the fact that it's made in America, it's like it's a bit of a value purchase. And again, I'm really fortunate that I could,
Hmm.
but like I would much rather support that than something that feels very impersonal. It's just another piece of gear. And so, yeah, man, you got me with the marketing scheme. It worked. And I love
Yeah.
the pack. Like that's the other thing. If your pack sucked, none of this would matter.
Yeah,
You
none of it
know,
would work, right?
none of it
Like,
would work if your gear
yeah.
wasn't as good as it is. And so, yeah, I've taken it on two backcountry bear hunts now and performed perfectly.
Yeah, sweet.
Um, and I'm excited to run it in the field. The other it's good to have a second frame pack. Like I'm glad that I have two packs that both have a frame rather than having one frame and two bags. Um, but yeah, I use the one for rucking and I'll use yours for hunting.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that goes back to like what you said, like asking about our company. None of this would work if the product sucked, right?
Exactly.
Because
Like
it's
that's
easy
the
to
bottom
make,
line.
yeah, it's easy to make the $8 widget and then sell it and have no accountability to the customer, right? Because you're so
Hmm.
like the person who made the product is so far removed from the customer because they sold it
Yeah.
to a wholesaler who sold it to a reseller who sold it to a sucker at that point because it's a piece of crap.
Hmm. Yeah.
But when you have that direct connection, it's like, I mean, we have a lot of accountability with, hey, we're making these claims and saying this pack is great and then selling it and it's not cheap, but we have to like face that. Like we have to own that at the end of
Hmm.
the day because there's no place to hide and no middleman in between.
Yeah, they're coming directly back to you rather than to Sportsman's or Shields. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I
Well, that's
appreciate
cool,
it.
man.
Yeah.
I was gonna tell you too, you for people who don't know, and again, I don't even know if all this is making the podcast at this point, but you're not a fanboy because you also called us out on some stuff through the podcast. So
Well, I appreciate it. Sorry, I did come in hot that one day, and I mean, I meant the intent behind it, but I didn't mean the piss and vinegar. So
no,
I
like I told you
appreciate.
before, I appreciate it. Just in case this
Yeah,
does make the podcast, you had heard Steve and I talk about first date and uh, like treat it nonchalantly and called out like, hey, you guys need to basically respect that people listen to you for good or for bad, and definitely don't be careless with brushing off like first aid and all that, which is, it is a valid point in the context of what we discussed.
I wasn't that diplomatic about it, though,
No,
to
you
be
weren't.
fair. I appreciate that about you, Mark. You got a very calm, diplomatic vibe to you, and sometimes I'm a little excitable, especially about stuff I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Well, cool,
Well,
man.
thanks, man. This has been a really good time. I was a little nervous, but this has been a really good time, man. I appreciate it.
Well, that is a wrap. It's going to be fun to hear from Nick later this fall after the upcoming hunt. And speaking of that, stay in touch. Let us know how your hunts go. Maybe you have a story that is unique, a lesson that you learned, or something like that. It'd be good to hear from you. Reach out, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. As always, we thank you so much for tuning in and for the support. Be sure to hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.